Welcome back, seekers of knowledge and rest, to our quiet corner by the fireplace. The flames dance low and steady tonight, casting their warm glow across our shared space as we continue our journey through the lore of Elder Scrolls, Oblivion Remastered. In our previous gatherings, we witnessed the fall of an empire and explored the infinite realms beyond our world. Tonight we turn our attention inward to the web of organizations that provide structure and purpose to life within Cyrodiil. The guilds and factions of the Imperial province represent more than mere collections of like-minded individuals. They are the sinew and muscle of society, institutions that bind together the disparate elements of the empire, providing order, opportunity, and occasionally shadow where the light of Imperial law cannot or will not reach. Some stand proudly in the daylight, their banners and charters displayed for all to see. The Fighters Guild with its gleaming weapons and proud traditions of honorable mercenary work. The Mages Guild with its towers of arcane learning and carefully guarded secrets. These organizations operate with the Empire's explicit blessing, serving vital functions while remaining under the distant supervision of the Ruby Throne. Others move in twilight or darkness, their operations whispered but rarely witnessed by common folk. The Thieves Guild with its intricate code and mysterious masked leader. The Dark Brotherhood with its black sacraments and reverence for the void. These shadow organizations exist outside Imperial sanction, yet provide services that many, including those in positions of power, occasionally find necessary. Still others serve specific purposes, often unknown to the general population. The Blades, ostensibly the Emperor's bodyguards, maintain a network of spies and agents throughout Tamriel. The Knights of the Nine, once forgotten but restored during this pivotal time, represent the militant arm of the Nine Divines' worship. As the crackling of the fire marks the passage of time, allow your mind to drift through the guild halls and hidden sanctuaries of Cyrodiil, each organization with its own hierarchy, traditions, and secrets, each offering a different path for those seeking their place in the complex tapestry of Imperial society. Our journey begins with the overarching structure that contains them all, the Imperial hierarchy that establishes the official boundaries within which these various factions operate, compete, and occasionally conspire. Chapter 1. The Imperial Structure. The Empire of Tamriel, with its capital in the heart of Cyrodiil, represents the most sophisticated governmental system in the known world. Built upon foundations established by Tiber Septim at the dawn of the Third Era, the imperial structure combines elements of monarchy, aristocracy, meritocracy, and bureaucracy into a complex web of authority and responsibility designed to govern vast territories. At the pinnacle of this structure stands, or stood before the Oblivion crisis, the Emperor, the living embodiment of imperial authority. More than merely a ruler, the Emperor of Tamriel served as both the secular and spiritual head of the empire, linking the divine and mundane through the amulet of kings and the covenant with Akatosh. This dual role elevated imperial authority beyond conventional political power, imbuing it with religious significance that fostered loyalty even in distant provinces. The emperor's will flowed through several distinct channels of authority, each with its own jurisdiction and traditions. Most visible among these was the Imperial Legion, the military force responsible for defending the empire's borders, maintaining order within its territories, and executing the emperor's directives when physical force proved necessary. Legionnaires in their distinctive armor represented the most tangible manifestation of imperial authority for most citizens, particularly in frontier regions where other institutions maintained minimal presence. Alongside but distinct from the Legion stood the Imperial Watch, the dedicated peacekeeping force of the imperial city, and, by extension, a model for similar organizations throughout provincial capitals. Where the Legion concerned itself primarily with large-scale threats and interprovincial matters, the Watch focused on day-to-day maintenance of order, crime prevention, and enforcement of local ordinances. The delineation between these forces sometimes blurred, particularly during crises, but their separate chains of command and areas of responsibility generally prevented conflicts of authority. For matters requiring subtlety rather than force, the Emperor relied upon the Blades, an organization we will explore in greater detail later. Serving as both bodyguards and intelligence agents, the Blades operated with considerable autonomy, answering directly to the Emperor rather than through the conventional chain of command. This special status allowed them to observe and, when necessary, investigate other imperial institutions, ensuring that corruption or disloyalty could not take root undetected within the government. The legislative and administrative functions of the empire rested primarily with the Elder Council, a body comprising representatives from Tamriel's noble houses, appointed officials of particular merit, and occasional special members selected for specific expertise or influence. During periods of imperial transition or absence, such as the interregnum following the Oblivion Crisis, the Elder Council assumed governance of the empire, maintaining continuity until a new emperor could be crowned. The Elder Council's chambers in the imperial city hosted debates on matters ranging from taxation and trade policy to diplomatic relations with neighboring powers and responses to unusual threats. While the emperor retained ultimate authority to overrule their decisions, wise rulers generally avoided doing so without compelling reason, recognizing that the council represented important constituencies whose support remained essential for effective governance. Beneath these highest levels of authority extended a vast bureaucracy of ministries, offices, departments, and bureaus, each responsible for particular aspects of imperial administration. The Ministry of Commerce regulated trade and collected customs duties. The Imperial Tax Office gathered the revenues that sustained governmental operations. The Office of Imperial Cartography maintained and updated maps of the Empire's territories and beyond. Dozens of similar organizations, some dating back to the earliest days of the Empire, and others established to address newer concerns, collectively managed the countless details required for governance of a realm spanning most of a continent. This bureaucratic apparatus extended into the provinces through a system of governors, legates, and local officials who represented imperial authority beyond the immediate reach of the imperial city. In some regions, particularly those with strong native traditions of self-governance, these officials worked alongside local institutions, creating hybrid systems that combined imperial oversight with indigenous practices. In others, especially frontier territories or recently pacified regions, imperial representatives exercised more direct control, gradually introducing structures designed to integrate these areas more fully into the empire. The judicial system operated as a semi-independent branch of imperial authority, with courts established at various levels to address matters of appropriate scope. Local magistrates handled minor offenses and civil disputes in villages and small towns. City courts presided over more significant cases within their jurisdictions. Provincial high courts considered matters of broader importance or appeals from lower decisions, and the Imperial Court, comprising the most respected judicial minds in Tamriel, addressed cases of empire-wide significance and served as the final authority on interpretation of imperial law. This layered approach to justice allowed for consideration of local customs and circumstances while maintaining consistent application of core imperial principles. A minor theft might be treated differently in Skyrim than in High Rock, accounting for cultural differences regarding property, but treason against the Empire would face similar consequences regardless of where the crime occurred. This flexibility within a structured framework typified the imperial approach to governance across many domains. Religion occupied a unique position within the imperial structure. The Temple of the One, dedicated to the 9 divines, represented the official imperial faith, with the emperor serving as its symbolic head. However, unlike some historical empires that demanded exclusive worship of state-approved deities, the Tamrielic Empire generally permitted diverse religious practices, provided they did not directly threaten imperial authority or public welfare. This religious tolerance extended even to certain forms of Daedra worship, though not to destructive cults like the mythic Dawn, reduced theological tensions that might otherwise have undermined imperial rule in regions with strong indigenous faiths. The economic foundation of the empire rested on a complex interplay between imperial institutions and semi-independent commercial organizations. The empire maintained the official currency, septims or gold coins, bearing the emperor's likeness, and regulated banking through the Imperial Commerce Authority. Trade guilds, merchant houses, and other business entities operated within this framework, with varying degrees of imperial oversight, depending on their size, importance, and relationship with governing authorities. The East Empire Company deserves special mention in this context. Established with imperial backing, but operating as a distinct entity, this massive trading organization extended imperial economic influence far beyond the reach of direct political control. Through its offices in ports and commercial centers throughout Tamriel and beyond, the company facilitated trade, gathered economic intelligence, and occasionally served as an unofficial diplomatic channel when conventional approaches proved insufficient or inappropriate. Education and research within the empire followed similarly mixed patterns of imperial direction and institutional autonomy. The Arcane University in the Imperial City operated under the auspices of the Mages Guild rather than direct imperial control, yet maintained close relations with the government, providing magical expertise when needed and training spellcasters who often entered imperial service. Similar arrangements existed with other specialized institutions, creating mutually beneficial relationships that advanced both imperial interests and the specific missions of these organizations. Beneath these formal structures of power and authority flowed currents of influence, less visible but often equally significant. Noble houses maintained complex networks of allies and dependents, leveraging social connections to shape policy or secure advantages. Wealthy merchants formed consortia to protect shared interests. Religious organizations cultivated relationships with influential officials sympathetic to their causes. And throughout the system, personal connections, friendships, romantic attachments, family ties, shared histories created webs of loyalty and obligation that frequently influenced decisions as much as official directives or legal requirements. The imperial structure thus represented not a simple hierarchy, but a complex ecosystem of overlapping authorities, competing interests, and collaborative arrangements. This complexity created inefficiencies and occasionally allowed corruption to flourish in shadowed corners, but it also provided resilience and adaptability that more rigid systems lacked. When one component failed or faltered, others could compensate, maintaining essential functions until proper order could be restored. During the Oblivion Crisis, this resilience proved crucial to the Empire's survival. With Emperor Uriel Septim Zevend and his known heirs assassinated, the Elder Council maintained governmental continuity, while the Blades searched for Martin Septim. As Oblivion gates opened across Tamriel, the Imperial Legion coordinated with provincial forces and local authorities to organize resistance. When conventional military approaches proved ineffective against Daedric invasion, the Mages Guild provided arcane expertise that helped develop more successful countermeasures. In the aftermath of the crisis, with the Septim bloodline ended and the Amulet of Kings destroyed, the imperial structure faced unprecedented challenges. The metaphysical foundation of imperial authority, the divine right of the Dragonborn emperors, had dissolved, requiring new justifications for the empire's continued existence and rule. The destruction in the imperial city and throughout the provinces demanded vast resources for reconstruction, stretching already depleted treasuries beyond their limits. And the psychological trauma of the invasion left deep scars in the collective consciousness of the empire's population, creating anxieties and resentments that would smolder for generations. That the empire survived at all testifies to the strength of the structures Tiber Septim established centuries earlier. Though weakened and transformed, the imperial institutions continued functioning, adapting to new realities while maintaining essential services and authorities. The Elder Council guided the transition to the Mede dynasty, establishing a new basis for imperial legitimacy, rooted in practical governance rather than divine right. The bureaucracy continued administering territories, collecting taxes, and maintaining records despite the chaos. And the Legion, though diminished, still defended the empire's borders and kept peace within its remaining territories. This period of transition and rebuilding revealed both the strengths and limitations of the imperial structure. Its distributed authority prevented total collapse when the ultimate source of power, the emperor, was removed. Its overlapping responsibilities ensured that essential functions continued despite significant disruptions. Its flexible approach to provincial governance allowed for adaptation to vastly different local conditions in the crisis's aftermath. Yet the system's dependence on the emperor as its symbolic and spiritual center created vulnerabilities that would never fully heal. Without the Covenant and the Dragonfires, without a Dragonborn on the Ruby Throne, the Empire lost something intangible but essential, a mystical legitimacy that transcended practical authority. The mortal institutions of government continued, but the divine blessing that had set the Empire apart now resided solely in history and memory rather than living tradition. Understanding this imperial structure provides necessary context for exploring the various guilds and factions that operated within it. Some, like the Fighters Guild and Mages Guild, existed through explicit imperial charter, providing essential services while remaining technically independent. Others, like the Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood, operated entirely outside official sanction, yet filled roles that the formal structure could not or would not acknowledge. Still others, like the Blades, functioned as integral components of the imperial system, while maintaining traditions and purposes predating the empire itself. Each of these organizations navigated the complex imperial environment according to its own nature and goals, finding opportunities in the system's gaps and limitations, while respecting or carefully circumventing its more rigid boundaries. As we examine them individually, We will see how they complemented, competed with, and occasionally undermined both the official Imperial structure and each other, creating the rich institutional ecosystem that defined life in Third Era Cyrodiil. Chapter 2. The Fighters Guild. Among the many institutions operating within the Imperial framework, the Fighters Guild stands as one of the oldest and most respected organization of professional warriors, offering martial services to those who can afford them while operating under strict codes of conduct and Imperial oversight. More than mere mercenaries, the Guild's members represent the regulated, legitimate face of martial service for hire, distinguished from common sellswords by their training, accountability, and adherence to established standards. The origins of the Fighters Guild trace back to the early Second Era, specifically to the year 2 E321, when the Akaviri potentate Versailles issued the Guild Act, following a period of significant instability. Having declared martial law and disbanded most private armies throughout the empire, the potentate recognized the need for regulated military services that could address threats too minor to warrant legion involvement, but too significant for local guards to handle effectively. The Guild Act established both the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild, creating Imperial-sanctioned alternatives to the independent mercenary companies and magical practitioners whose unregulated activities had contributed to regional instability. Initially known as the Sifim, derived from its Saisi term, meaning soldiers, the organization adopted the name Fighters Guild as the common tongue grew dominant throughout the empire. This change reflected more than mere terminology. It represented the Guild's evolution from a stopgap solution during crisis into a permanent institution integrated into the fabric of Imperial society, providing consistent martial services across generations and political transitions. By the late Third Era, the period depicted in Oblivion, the Fighters Guild maintained chapter houses in every major city throughout Cyrodiil and most provincial capitals beyond. Each chapter house served as both headquarters and home for local members, containing training facilities, sleeping quarters, common areas, and administrative offices. The architecture of these buildings emphasized functionality over ostentation, with sturdy construction, practical layouts, and minimal decoration beyond the Guild's distinctive cross-swords emblem prominently displayed at the entrance. The Guild's organizational structure combined military hierarchy with elements of craft guilds, creating a system that valued both discipline and individual skill development. At the lowest level stood associates, new members still proving their reliability and abilities through minor assignments. Above them, journeyman members formed the backbone of the guild, handling routine contracts and training to improve their capabilities. The most experienced members achieved the rank of guardian, taking on the most challenging assignments and often serving as mentors to less experienced colleagues. Champion represented a special designation given to members who had demonstrated exceptional skill or rendered particularly valuable service to the guild. Overseeing each chapter house was a local guild head or chapter master responsible for daily operations, assignment distribution, and membership discipline within their jurisdiction. These leaders reported to the guild master, the organization's highest authority, who maintained an office in the Imperial city and coordinated with the Elder Council regarding matters affecting the guild's charter and operations. During the Oblivion Crisis, this position was held by Velina Donton, a formidable warrior whose leadership faced significant challenges from both external threats and internal corruption. Unlike some Imperial institutions, The Fighters Guild operated without direct financial support from the Imperial treasury. Instead, it sustained itself through contract fees, with a portion of each payment contributing to the guild's overall maintenance and the remainder going to the members who fulfilled the assignment. This self-supporting structure fostered both independence and accountability. The guild needed to maintain its reputation for reliable service to attract clients, while individual members had direct financial incentive to complete their tasks efficiently and effectively. The types of contracts accepted by the guild covered a broad spectrum of martial services, though with notable limitations established by their charter and internal regulations. Clearing monsters from mines, roads, or other economically significant locations represented perhaps the most common assignments. Providing security for merchants, nobles, or valuable shipments formed another significant category. Recovering stolen property, especially when the theft involved violence or the items remained in dangerous locations, featured regularly in guild activities. Training guards or militia in proper combat techniques offered a less hazardous but still valuable service, particularly in smaller communities without permanent legion presence. Equally important to understanding the guild's role are the types of contracts they explicitly rejected. The Fighters Guild Charter specifically prohibited assassination, regardless of the target or justification offered. Participation in criminal activities, even when technically legal due to jurisdictional complications, remained forbidden. Taking sides in political disputes or civil conflicts without explicit imperial authorization could result in immediate expulsion, and contracts targeting legitimate business competitors rather than actual threats faced rejection as inappropriate use of martial force. These ethical boundaries distinguished the Fighters Guild from mere mercenaries and established their position as a regulated profession rather than simply warriors for hire. The guild's commitment to these principles, albeit with occasional lapses by individual members, earned them the respect and trust necessary to operate throughout the empire with minimal direct oversight, a privilege few armed organizations enjoyed under Imperial governance. The daily life of a Fighters Guild member balanced training, assignment, fulfillment, and organizational duties. Junior members typically spent mornings in martial practice, afternoons on assigned contracts or guild maintenance tasks, and evenings maintaining their equipment or studying relevant subjects like regional monster lore or tactical principles. More experienced members enjoyed greater freedom in managing their time, often focusing on longer-term contracts that might require extended travel or preparation. The equipment used by guild members reflected both regulation standards and individual preferences. While the guild provided basic weapons, armor, and supplies to all members, most warriors supplemented these with personally acquired items better suited to their fighting styles or specialties. Unlike the Imperial Legion, with its strictly uniform appearance, the Fighters Guild permitted and even encouraged customization that enhanced effectiveness, requiring only that members maintain their equipment properly and display guild insignia when operating officially. Training within the guild combined practical mentorship with structured instruction in various martial disciplines. New members learned basic techniques for a range of common weapons, along with fundamental tactics for fighting different adversaries. As they advanced, members typically specialized in particular combat approaches, some focusing on heavy armor and shields, others on archery or lighter, more mobile fighting styles, still others developing expertise with specific weapon types or against particular categories of opponents. This specialization allowed the guild to assign members to contracts that matched their capabilities, increasing both effectiveness and safety. The Fighters Guild maintained complex relationships with other institutions throughout the empire. With the Imperial Legion, they established clear jurisdictional boundaries, generally handling threats too minor for Legion involvement, but too significant for local guards. The Mages Guild represented both occasional competition when contracts might be fulfilled through either martial or magical means, and frequent collaboration, particularly when facing magical threats requiring combined expertise. City guards viewed guild members sometimes as welcome assistants, and other times as unwelcome interlopers, depending on local politics and personalities. More contentious was the guild's relationship with independent mercenary companies, particularly the Blackwood Company that established itself in Cyrodiil during the late Third Era. These unregulated competitors often accepted contracts the guild refused on ethical grounds, creating tensions that occasionally erupted into open conflict. The guild's insistence on maintaining standards sometimes cost them business in the short term, but preserved their reputation and imperial sanction over generations, an approach that ultimately proved wiser than the expedient compromises made by many competitors. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Fighters Guild found itself facing unprecedented challenges that tested both its capabilities and its organizational integrity. The sudden appearance of Oblivion Gates throughout Cyrodiil created demand for martial services far exceeding the guild's capacity, while simultaneously threatening the safety of guild members themselves. Some chapter houses suffered direct attacks, with the Kavach Guild Hall destroyed entirely during the initial Daedric assault on that city. The guild's response to the crisis revealed both strengths and limitations in its structure and approach. Unlike the Imperial Legion, the guild lacked the numbers and resources to mount systematic resistance to the Daedric invasion, yet its decentralized organization allowed local chapters to adapt independently to conditions in their regions, improvising responses without waiting for centralized direction. Individual members demonstrated exceptional courage, with many joining ad hoc defense forces in communities facing Daedric attack. Perhaps most significantly, the crisis exposed corruption within the guild itself, specifically the infiltration of the Blackwood Company and their use of hiss sap to enhance their fighters' capabilities at the cost of their judgment and restraint. This internal threat, coinciding with the external danger of Daedric invasion, nearly destroyed the guild before a new champion emerged to expose the Blackwood Company's methods and restore the guild's proper function and reputation. In the aftermath of the crisis, with Martin's Septim's sacrifice establishing a new permanent barrier against Daedric invasion, the Fighters Guild faced the challenge of redefining its purpose in a changed world. Many of its most experienced members had perished defending communities across Cyrodiil. Several chapter houses required extensive rebuilding, and the psychological impact of the invasion left many survivors questioning whether traditional approaches to martial service remained relevant against such overwhelming supernatural threats. Yet the fundamental need for regulated martial services persisted, perhaps even increased by the devastation left in the crisis's wake. Monsters occupied ruins abandoned during the fighting. Bandit groups formed from displaced populations and deserters. Trade routes required protection as commerce gradually resumed. Communities needed training for replacement guards after losing many defenders. The guild adapted to these new circumstances, adjusting its training to incorporate lessons from fighting Daedra and developing specialized techniques for addressing post-crisis threats. The endurance of the Fighters Guild through these extraordinary challenges testifies to the soundness of its founding principles and the flexibility of its organizational structure. Unlike purely bureaucratic institutions that collapse when their routines become unsuitable for changed circumstances, the guild combined clear standards with individual initiative in ways that allowed adaptation without losing its essential nature and purpose. Members followed their consciences within the framework of guild regulations, maintaining the organization's integrity while responding to unprecedented situations. For the ordinary citizens of Cyrodiil, the Fighters Guild represented security and stability in an often dangerous world, professional warriors who could address threats beyond individual capability, but without the overwhelming force and political complications of Legion involvement. For those who joined its ranks, the guild offered structure, purpose, and fellowship in the practice of martial disciplines, along with the opportunity to use combat skills productively rather than destructively. And for the Empire itself, the guild provided a regulated outlet for martial talents that might otherwise have found expression in banditry or unauthorized militias. In these multiple functions, practical, personal, and political, the Fighters Guild exemplified the complex interdependence of institutions that characterized Imperial society at its best. Neither fully private nor entirely public, neither completely autonomous nor directly controlled by central authority, the guild occupied a middle ground that served diverse needs while limiting the potential for abuse inherent in martial power. That balance, maintained across centuries of political change and countless individual members, stands as perhaps its greatest achievement and most enduring legacy. Chapter 3: The Mages Guild. Where the Fighters Guild represents martial discipline channeled through organizational structure, the Mages Guild embodies the regulation and advancement of arcane knowledge, a fellowship of spellcasters dedicated to studying, teaching, and applying magical arts within the boundaries of Imperial sanction. More than merely a school or research institution, the guild serves as the primary framework through which magical practice is legitimized, standardized, and made accessible throughout the Empire. Like its martial counterpart, the Mages Guild traces its origins to the Guild Act of 2E321, issued by Potentate Versidue Shea in response to the chaotic proliferation of independent magical practitioners following the fall of the First Empire. Prior to this decree, magic users operated with minimal oversight, forming small covens, isolated towers, or itinerant practices according to individual preference. While many used their abilities responsibly, others exploited magical power for personal gain or destructive purposes, creating dangers that increasingly concerned Imperial authorities. The Guild Act established a framework for magical practice that balanced regulation with autonomy, rather than placing spellcasters under direct Imperial control, an approach that would have faced fierce resistance and proven largely unenforceable. It created an independent organization, operating under charter, responsible for self-regulation, while maintaining standards acceptable to Imperial authorities. This compromise recognized both the necessity of magical services and the dangers of leaving them entirely unregulated. The individual most credited with shaping the early Mages Guild into a viable institution was Vanus Galerian, a former Pushijic monk, whose vision extended beyond the isolated elitism of Artium to encompass a more accessible approach to magical education and practice. Galerian established the first Mages Guild Hall in Firsthold on the Somerset Isles, creating a model that would eventually spread throughout Tamriel. His philosophy emphasized standardized training, ethical guidelines, and practical application of magical knowledge, principles that remained central to guild identity well into the Third Era. By the time of the Oblivion Crisis, the Mages Guild maintained a complex organizational structure extending throughout the Empire. At its heart stood the Arcane University in the Imperial City, a center for advanced study, research, and administrative coordination. Each major city hosted a guild hall, staffed by a mixture of researchers, teachers, service providers, and administrators, while smaller communities often contained modest guild outposts, offering basic magical services and initial training for prospective members. The leadership structure of the guild combined academic hierarchy with administrative authority. Each local guild hall operated under a hall steward responsible for day-to-day management. Above them, regional guild stewards coordinated activities across multiple locations. The Council of Mages, comprising the most accomplished spellcasters from various disciplines, established policies and standards for the entire organization, and at the summit stood the Archmage, the guild's highest authority and representative in dealings with the Elder Council and other Imperial institutions. During the period depicted in Oblivion, this position was held by Hannibal Traven, a controversial leader whose determination to eliminate necromancy from guild practice created significant internal tensions. Traven's policies, while ethically defensible, alienated a substantial portion of the guild's membership, contributing to the factionalism and vulnerability that proved so dangerous during the crisis. His predecessor, Archmage Traven, had maintained a more permissive approach that accommodated various magical philosophies under the guild umbrella, creating a superficially unified but internally divided organization that Traven sought to reform through more stringent regulations. Membership in the Mages Guild followed a progression from novice to master based on demonstrated magical ability, academic achievement, and service to the organization. Associate members, having shown basic aptitude and commitment, gained access to guild facilities and instruction but remained barred from the Arcane University and certain restricted knowledge. Journeyman mages, having passed standardized examinations in magical theory and practice, could pursue specialized studies and perform more complex services for the public. Full members enjoyed access to most guild resources and participated in governance through voting rights on certain matters, and master-level members, recognized for exceptional contributions to magical knowledge or guild operations, served as instructors, researchers, and leaders within the organization. Unlike the Fighters Guild, which focused primarily on providing services to external clients, the Mages Guild balanced multiple functions that sometimes created competing priorities. As an educational institution, it identified and trained magical talent from across the empire, providing structured pathways for development regardless of students' origins or financial resources. As a research organization, it supported investigation into new magical techniques, rediscovery of lost knowledge, and cataloging of arcane phenomena throughout Tamriel. As a service provider, it offered spellcasting, enchantment, alchemy, and consultation to the general public, often at rates lower than independent practitioners would charge. And as a regulatory body, it established and enforced standards for magical practice, distinguishing legitimate applications from forbidden techniques. This last function, regulation, proved perhaps the most contentious, particularly regarding necromancy. While Imperial law prohibited certain obviously harmful practices, such as creating undead armies or soul-trapping sentient beings without consent, many areas of magical practice occupied ethical gray zones where consensus proved difficult to establish. Should transformation magic be restricted when used on unwilling subjects, but permitted for self-modification? Did conjuration of Daedra require different regulations, depending on the entity summoned and purpose involved? Could researching forbidden knowledge be permitted if the purpose was defensive rather than practical application? These questions spawned endless debate within the guild, particularly as different magical traditions from across the empire brought diverse perspectives. on what constituted appropriate practice. Altmer approaches emphasized precision, control, and theoretical purity. Breton traditions balanced structured spellcasting with intuitive applications drawn from their unique magical heritage. Dunmer practitioners incorporated ancestral veneration elements that sometimes resembled necromancy while serving very different spiritual purposes. Reconciling these varied approaches into coherent guild policy required continuous negotiation and occasional compromise that satisfied no one completely. The physical spaces occupied by the Mages Guild reflected its multifaceted nature. Guild halls typically featured public areas where citizens could request services, intermediate spaces for member activities, and restricted sections containing valuable or potentially dangerous materials. Architectural styles varied by region, with some halls occupying purpose-built structures designed specifically for magical practice, while others adapted existing buildings to meet guild needs. Common elements across locations included extensive libraries, alchemical laboratories, enchanting areas with specialized equipment, lecture spaces for instruction, and living quarters for resident members. The Arcane University in the Imperial City represented the pinnacle of this architectural expression, a complex of towers, halls, libraries, and laboratories dedicated entirely to magical pursuits. Access to the university remained strictly controlled, with admission requiring both membership status and special recommendation from local guild leadership. This exclusivity maintained security around the most sensitive magical research, while creating an aspirational goal for junior members working toward advancement. Daily life within the guild combined structured activities with individual pursuits determined by each member's role and specialization. Junior members typically followed regimens of basic magical instruction, theoretical study, and simple practical applications. Journeyman mages divided their time between specialized studies, providing services to the public, and contributing to guild maintenance through tasks suited to their abilities. Senior members engaged primarily in research, teaching, administration, or special projects according to their expertise and interests. For all members, regardless of rank, the guild provided essential resources, difficult to obtain independently, access to rare books and scrolls, expensive alchemical ingredients, enchanting apparatus, and most importantly, the collective knowledge and experience of fellow spellcasters. This shared pool of information and resources created significant advantages over solitary practice, helping explain why so many magic users accepted guild regulation in exchange for membership benefits. The relationship between the Mages Guild and other Imperial institutions remained complex and occasionally tense. With the Fighters Guild, relations generally remained cordial, though sometimes competitive, particularly when contracts could be fulfilled through either martial or magical means. The Imperial Legion maintained formal arrangements for magical support during significant operations, while city guards often called upon local guild halls for assistance with magically created disturbances beyond conventional enforcement capabilities. More complicated was the guild's relationship with independent magical practitioners and organizations operating outside its umbrella. Some, like the Synod and College of Whispers, that would later emerge from the guild's eventual dissolution, represented philosophical factions that remained within imperial sanction while rejecting specific guild policies. Others, like the Order of the Black Worm, founded by Manamarco, pursued practices explicitly forbidden by both guild regulations and imperial law, creating direct opposition that occasionally erupted into open conflict. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Mages Guild faced challenges that tested both its magical capabilities and organizational cohesion. The sudden appearance of Oblivion gates throughout Cyrodiil created unprecedented magical disturbances, requiring immediate study and countermeasures. Daedric forces specifically targeted guild halls in several cities, recognizing the threat that organized magical resistance posed to the invasion, and internal divisions regarding necromancy, exacerbated by Archmage Travan's hardline policies, weakened the guild precisely when unity was most needed. The guild's response to these challenges demonstrated both remarkable strengths and significant limitations. Individual members displayed tremendous courage and magical skill, with many sacrificing themselves to protect communities or contribute crucial knowledge about Daedric weaknesses. The guild's research capabilities quickly produced useful information about the gates and effective methods for closing them, information that proved vital to the broader resistance effort. And despite internal disagreements, the basic framework of guild operations continued functioning throughout the crisis, providing essential magical services when they were most desperately needed. Yet the crisis also exposed fundamental weaknesses in the guild's structure and approach. The centralization of advanced knowledge and resources in the Arcane University created vulnerability when travel became increasingly dangerous, preventing members in distant halls from accessing crucial information. The emphasis on theoretical understanding and careful research proved ill-suited to the rapid response required by sudden Daedric incursions, and perhaps most significantly, the alienation of necromancers and other practitioners of controversial magic deprived the guild of potentially valuable perspectives and techniques during a period when every magical resource might have made a difference. In the aftermath of the crisis, with Martin Septim's sacrifice establishing a new barrier against Daedric invasion, the Mages Guild confronted the challenge of adapting to transformed circumstances. Many experienced members had perished defending their halls or researching Daedric phenomena. Precious books, artifacts, and research materials had been destroyed in attacked locations, and the psychological impact of confronting such overwhelming magical threats left many questioning whether traditional approaches to arcane study remained relevant in a world where dimensional barriers could be breached on such scale. Unlike the Fighters Guild, which successfully navigated this post-crisis environment and continued operating into the Fourth Era, the Mages Guild ultimately failed to maintain its cohesion in the face of these challenges. Internal divisions regarding magical practices, temporarily submerged during the immediate crisis, but never truly resolved, re-emerged with new intensity during the Reconstruction period. Without the unifying influence of the Septim Empire at its height, these conflicts eventually led to the guild's dissolution and replacement by more specialized magical organizations with narrower but more clearly defined purposes and jurisdictions. This eventual fate, however, should not overshadow the guild's tremendous contributions during its centuries of operation. By establishing standardized magical education available throughout the empire, it democratized access to arcane knowledge previously restricted to the wealthy, the well-born, or those fortunate enough to attract a master's individual attention. Through consistent regulation and ethical guidelines, it reduced the incidence of magical misuse that had previously created widespread fear and resentment of spellcasters among the general population. And by advancing understanding of Tamriel's magical principles and phenomena, it expanded the boundaries of what magic could achieve when properly studied and applied. For the ordinary citizens of Cyrodiil, the Mages Guild represented the responsible face of magical practice, the place where minor ailments could be cured, useful items enchanted, or protective amulets purchased at reasonable prices, all with Imperial oversight, ensuring safety and legitimacy. For those with magical aptitude, it offered structured pathways to develop their abilities without the dangers of self-instruction or the questionable ethics of more secretive magical traditions. And for the Empire itself, it provided crucial magical expertise for both practical governance and extraordinary threats, regulated through a system that balanced arcane autonomy with public accountability. In this integration of the extraordinary into ordinary life, making the magical mundane without diminishing its wonder, the Mages Guild perhaps achieved its greatest success, creating a world where spellcasting, while still special, became a recognized profession rather than a mysterious and feared power. That normalization, maintained across centuries, despite occasional spectacular failures, changed Tamriel's relationship with magic in ways that would persist long after the guild itself had passed into history. Chapter 4: The Thieves Guild. Where the Fighters Guild and Mages Guild operate openly under Imperial charter, with public halls and official recognition, the Thieves Guild exists in the shadows, a criminal organization that nonetheless maintains its own code of conduct, hierarchy, and essential functions within Cyrodiil's complex social ecosystem. Neither sanctioned nor completely suppressed by Imperial authority, the Guild occupies a gray area where pragmatic tolerance replaces official approval, allowing it to regulate illegal activities that would otherwise occur in more chaotic and destructive forms. Unlike its legitimate counterparts, the Thieves Guild maintains no documented foundation date or chartered establishment. Its origins likely evolved organically from looser associations of criminals seeking mutual protection and coordinated operations in the face of increasingly organized law enforcement. By creating standards, territories, and leadership structures, these early thieves transformed disorganized crime into a regulated profession, still illegal, but governed by principles that mitigated its most harmful manifestations. By the late Third Era, the period depicted in Oblivion, the Thieves Guild had developed into a sophisticated organization, extending throughout Cyrodiil's major cities and into several neighboring provinces. Its operations centered around various doyen, experienced thieves who served as local leaders, assignment distributors, and arbiters of internal disputes. These doyen reported to a mysterious figure known only as the Grey Fox, whose identity remained concealed behind an enchanted cowl said to obscure not just the wearer's face, but their very existence from memory and record. The guild maintained no public headquarters or official gathering places. Instead, it operated through a network of safe houses, fence locations, and informal meeting spots, typically disguised as ordinary businesses or hidden in plain sight within public areas. In the Imperial city, the Garden of Deriloth served as a nighttime gathering place for guild members, while the waterfront district generally provided safe haven due to the guild's strong influence among its impoverished residents. Other cities featured similar arrangements, tavern back rooms where certain passwords granted access, seemingly abandoned properties that housed guild operations, or legitimate businesses whose owners maintained cooperative relationships with local thieves. Membership in the guild followed a progression based on demonstrated skill, reliability, and adherence to the guild's code. Recruits, having proven basic abilities and received sponsorship from existing members, gained access to guild fences and protection, but received only the simplest, lowest risk assignments. Footpads, having completed multiple successful operations, took on more challenging jobs with higher rewards and risks. Bandit rank indicated experienced thieves capable of complex heists, requiring significant planning and execution skill, and master thieves, the elite of the organization, handled the most difficult and sensitive operations, while often serving as mentors to less experienced members. Unlike the hierarchical command structures of legitimate guilds, the Thieves Guild operated more as a confederation of semi-autonomous professionals united by shared interests and code rather than strict chains of authority. While the Doyen and ultimately the Grey Fox maintained organizational leadership, individual thieves retained significant discretion regarding which assignments to accept, how to execute them, and when to operate. This flexibility allowed the guild to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, while maximizing the diverse skills and approaches of its membership. The guild's activities encompassed a wide range of illegal but non-violent operations. Pickpocketing represented perhaps the most basic guild activity, with members targeting those wealthy enough to afford the loss, while avoiding the destitute, who could be ruined by even minor theft. Burglary of homes, shops, and warehouses formed another significant category, with guild members priding themselves on entering and exiting without detection or confrontation. Fencing stolen goods through approved channels ensured that items could be converted to currency without drawing undue attention from authorities. Information brokering, the buying and selling of secrets, locations, and other valuable intelligence, provided supplementary income while creating useful leverage for protection against official interference. Equally important in defining the guild were the activities it explicitly prohibited. Murder represented the most serious violation of guild principles, with those who killed during operations facing expulsion or worse, regardless of circumstances or justification. Theft from the poor remained forbidden, both for ethical reasons and to maintain positive relationships with the lower classes, who often provided hiding places and information, and stealing from fellow guild members or guild property constituted a fundamental betrayal of the organization's foundational principles, typically resulting in permanent exclusion from guild protection and resources. This code of conduct, sometimes called the Thieves Guild Manifesto, though rarely committed to writing, distinguished guild members from common bandits or cutthroats, creating a professional identity that many members regarded with genuine pride despite its criminal nature. By prohibiting violence and targeting primarily those who could afford the loss, guild thieves could view themselves as practitioners of a skilled trade rather than predators, more akin to legitimate guild members practicing specialized abilities than to the truly dangerous criminals who operated outside guild regulations. The relationship between the Thieves Guild and Imperial authorities reflected complex practical realities rather than simple opposition. While the City Watch and Imperial Legion officially sought to arrest guild members when identified, the actual implementation of this policy varied tremendously depending on location, circumstances, and individuals involved. In some areas, corrupt officials accepted regular payments to ignore guild activities within certain boundaries. In others, a tacit understanding existed. Thieves limited their operations to acceptable targets and minimized public disorder, while guards focused enforcement efforts on more violent or disruptive criminals. This pragmatic accommodation recognized an uncomfortable truth. In a complex society, some degree of theft and illegal trading would occur regardless of enforcement efforts. By allowing the Thieves Guild to regulate these activities, imposing limitations that reduced public harm while providing structured outlets for those drawn to criminal pursuits, authorities could indirectly influence behavior they could not directly control. The Guild's prohibition on violence, in particular, served public safety interests by channeling criminal energy toward property crimes rather than assault or murder. For those who joined its ranks, the Thieves Guild offered benefits difficult to obtain through independent criminal activity. Guild fences purchase stolen goods at better prices than other outlets, while providing greater security and reliability. Guild contacts shared information about promising targets, guard patrol patterns, and potential dangers. Most importantly, guild affiliation offered protection both from authorities through shared legal resources and warning systems, and from other criminals through mutual defense arrangements and the deterrent effect of guild retaliation against those who targeted members. The daily life of a guild thief balanced caution with opportunism, preparation with improvisation. Most operated primarily at night, when darkness provided natural concealment and fewer witnesses complicated detection. They typically spent daylight hours resting, planning future operations, maintaining equipment, or conducting surveillance of potential targets. Unlike legitimate guild members who could openly practice their trades, thieves worked constantly to maintain inconspicuous public identities that drew minimal attention while concealing their actual activities. The equipment used by guild members emphasized stealth, access, and escape rather than combat capability. Lockpicks of various designs allowed entry to secured areas without leaving evidence of forced access. Soft-soled shoes or boots minimized noise during movement. Dark clothing without distinctive features blended into shadows while remaining inconspicuous if the wearer needed to move through public areas. Small, concealable tools facilitated non-destructive approaches to various security measures, a philosophy summarized in the guild's unofficial motto that an expert thief leaves no trace of their passing except for what isn't there anymore. Beyond physical tools, guild thieves relied heavily on information, perhaps their most valuable resource and closely guarded advantage. Knowledge of patrol schedules allowed operations during predictable gaps in coverage. Awareness of building layouts identified optimal entry points and escape routes. Understanding which containers most likely held valuables reduced time spent searching during high-risk periods, and familiarity with individual guards' habits, tendencies, and vulnerabilities created opportunities for distraction, misdirection, or occasionally bribery when other approaches proved impractical. Unlike the Mages Guild with its emphasis on theoretical knowledge, or the Fighters Guild with its focus on direct confrontation, the Thieves Guild taught primarily through practical apprenticeship supplemented by specific technique instruction. New members typically learned by accompanying experienced thieves on operations, beginning with minimal responsibilities and gradually assuming more complex roles as they demonstrated capability. This emphasis on practical skill development created a continuous oral tradition of techniques, approaches, and solutions passed directly from experienced practitioners to the next generation, rather than through formal documentation or standardized curriculum. The most significant figure in the Guild's Third Era operations was undoubtedly the Grey Fox, a near-mythical figure whose identity remained hidden behind an enchanted cowl said to be stolen from Nocturnal herself. This masterful thief had led the Guild for so long that many younger members doubted whether the Grey Fox was a single individual or a succession of leaders adopting the same disguise and identity. The truth that the cowl's curse prevented anyone from remembering the wearer's true identity even after the cowl was removed remained known to only a select few within the Guild's highest echelons. During the period depicted in Oblivion, the Grey Fox orchestrated the Guild's most ambitious operation in generations, the theft of an Elder Scroll from the Imperial Palace itself. This seemingly impossible heist, requiring penetration of what many considered Tamriel's most secure location, served purposes beyond mere acquisition of a valuable item. It formed the culmination of a complex plan to break the Cowl's curse and restore recognition to the Grey Fox's true identity, a nobleman whose separation from his beloved wife, due to the curse, had motivated decades of research and preparation leading to this extraordinary theft. The Thieves Guild's experience during the Oblivion crisis differed significantly from that of legitimate organizations, with no fixed headquarters to defend or public position to maintain. The Guild adapted to the chaotic conditions with characteristic flexibility. Many members temporarily suspended normal operations to focus on survival, while others found new opportunities amidst the disruption of regular security arrangements. Some even utilized their specialized skills for broadly beneficial purposes, extracting valuable items from danger-threatened areas, smuggling essential supplies past barriers, or gathering intelligence about Daedric movements that proved useful to defense efforts. In the aftermath of the crisis, with Imperial authority weakened and resources stretched thin for reconstruction, the Thieves Guild found both new challenges and opportunities. The general poverty following widespread destruction reduced available targets, while increasing competition from desperate individuals driven to theft by necessity rather than profession. Yet the same conditions created openings for expansion, as authorities focused on more immediate concerns than property crime enforcement, allowing the Guild to strengthen its position in several regions previously resistant to its influence. Perhaps most significantly, the resolution of the Grey Fox's personal quest during this period, breaking the Cowl's curse and restoring his true identity, created opportunity for new leadership and direction within the Guild. While historical records remain vague about exactly who assumed control following these events, the Guild clearly survived and eventually prospered into the Fourth Era, maintaining its essential nature and functions despite the broader Imperial collapse that followed in subsequent generations. For the general population of Cyrodiil, the Thieves Guild represented a complex and contradictory presence. Those directly victimized by Guild operations naturally viewed it negatively, experiencing losses that, while usually carefully calculated to avoid true hardship, nevertheless created inconvenience and sense of violation. Yet many others, particularly among the lower classes, viewed the Guild with a mixture of tolerance and even admiration, seeing its members as cleverly working outside a system that offered them few legitimate opportunities, while adhering to principles that minimized harm to ordinary citizens. This ambivalence reflected broader questions about justice and fairness in Imperial society. When wealth disparities reached extremes, when corruption allowed the powerful to avoid consequences for their own misdeeds, when legitimate avenues for advancement remained closed to those of humble birth, regardless of talent or effort, was organized theft truly less ethical than the structural arrangements that created and maintained such inequalities. The Thieves Guild existed partly because such questions had no simple answers, occupying the gray area where theoretical justice confronted practical realities about how societies actually function beyond their idealized self-conceptions. In this morally complex space, the Guild created its own form of order, a regulated approach to activities that would occur regardless of its existence, guided by principles that, while falling short of strict legality, nevertheless imposed meaningful ethical boundaries on criminal behavior. That achievement, maintaining a code that most members genuinely respected, despite operating outside legal frameworks, represents perhaps the Guild's most remarkable feature and the true source of its endurance across centuries of Imperial rise and fall. Chapter 5: The Dark Brotherhood. If the Thieves Guild occupies a gray area between criminality and regulated profession. The Dark Brotherhood exists in deeper shadow, an organization dedicated to the art of assassination, combining elements of religious cult, criminal syndicate, and deadly fraternity, operating entirely outside Imperial law, yet following its own strict codes and hierarchies. The Brotherhood represents perhaps the most feared and misunderstood faction in all of Cyrodiil, a name whispered with dread by commoners and nobles alike. Unlike other guilds and factions whose origins can be traced to specific historical events or founders, the Dark Brotherhood emerged from older, more obscure roots, specifically the Morag Tong, an ancient guild of assassins that operated legally within Morrowind for centuries under official writs of execution. When the Morag Tong's influence began spreading beyond Dunmer territories in the Second Era, other provinces responded with harsh suppression, forcing the organization to either retreat to Morrowind or evolve into new forms better suited to operating without sanction. From this fractured legacy arose the Dark Brotherhood, distinguished from its predecessor primarily by religious orientation, where the Morag Tong worshipped Mephilar, the Daedric prince of murder, sex, and secrets. The Brotherhood developed reverence for Sithis, the embodiment of the void, guided by the spectral entity they called the Night Mother. This theological shift represented more than mere substitution of deities. It fundamentally transformed the purpose of assassination from political tool to sacramental act, killing not merely as contracted service, but as religious obligation that sent souls to the void that Sithis embodied. By the late Third Era, the Dark Brotherhood maintained sanctuaries in most major cities throughout Tamriel, concealed beneath innocuous facades or hidden in locations few would willingly approach. In Cyrodiil, these sanctuaries existed in Shadin Hal, Bruma, and the Imperial city itself, among others, each a self-contained community where Brotherhood members could live, train, and receive assignments while remaining invisible to the society around them. The internal structure of the Brotherhood combined religious hierarchy with practical operational organization. At the highest level stood the Black Hand, 5 individuals comprising 4 speakers and the listener, who alone could hear the Night Mother's commands. Each speaker oversaw multiple sanctuaries through local leaders called sanctuary speakers, who managed day-to-day operations and directly supervised the Brotherhood's rank-and-file members, the murderers, eliminators, slayers, and assassins who performed contracted killings throughout the province. This hierarchy functioned through a system of compartmentalized knowledge designed to protect the organization, even if individual members were captured or compromised. Most Brotherhood assassins knew only their direct superiors and fellow sanctuary members, with information about wider operations, leadership, and especially the Night Mother's location restricted to progressively higher ranks. This structure proved remarkably resilient against Imperial attempts to dismantle the organization, as raids on individual sanctuaries rarely yielded information leading to other Brotherhood locations or personnel. Recruitment into the Brotherhood followed paths as dark as its purpose. Unlike conventional organizations that accepted applications or invited promising candidates, the Brotherhood typically identified potential members by observing those who had already committed murder, particularly those who demonstrated both aptitude for killing and psychological disposition suited to the Brotherhood's unique culture. A representative would approach such individuals during sleep, offering formal invitation to join the family upon completion of an assigned killing to demonstrate both skill and commitment. This selective recruitment process created a membership uniquely suited to the Brotherhood's requirements, individuals comfortable with taking lives, capable of operating with minimal supervision, yet disciplined enough to follow the strict codes that governed Brotherhood operations. Those who accepted invitation typically did so, not merely for payment, though the Brotherhood compensated its members well, but from deeper motivations: fascination with death, desire for belonging among others of similar nature, or genuine religious devotion to Sithis and the Night Mother. Life within a Brotherhood sanctuary balanced the practical necessities of a criminal organization with the ritualistic elements of a religious cult. Members trained continuously in various killing methods, from orthodox weapon combat to more specialized techniques involving poison, magic, or staged accidents. They studied targets' habits and vulnerabilities, planned approach and escape routes, and rehearsed contingencies for potential complications. Alongside these practical preparations, they participated in regular devotional rituals, prayers to Sithis, offerings to the Night Mother, and ceremonies marking significant events in Brotherhood history or individual assassins' achievements. The physical environments of Brotherhood's sanctuaries reflected this dual nature. Training areas contained equipment for practicing combat, archery, and stealth movement. Alchemy laboratories produced poisons, healing preparations, and specialized substances unique to Brotherhood techniques. Sleeping quarters provided private space for members who often found normal society uncomfortable or dangerous, and shrines to Sithis and the Night Mother occupied prominent positions, typically featuring distinctive imagery: a skeletal figure representing the Dread Father, a maternal form surrounded by children, symbolizing the Night Mother, and often a black handprint embodying the leadership that guided the organization. The Brotherhood's operations followed protocols established through centuries of refinement. When someone in Tamriel wished to arrange a killing, they performed the Black Sacrament, a ritual involving specific components: nightshade, a skeleton, candles arranged in a specific pattern, and the recitation of a prayer to the Night Mother. This ritual sent what Brotherhood members described as a psychic echo detectable by the listener, who would then assign a speaker to arrange the contract details and delegate the killing to appropriate sanctuary members. This system created an effective screening mechanism that both limited Brotherhood services to those truly committed to arranging death, given the difficulty and risk of performing the sacrament, and provided religious legitimacy to the killings themselves, each victim having been, in Brotherhood theology, chosen by Sith. Is through the Night Mother's communication that many Brotherhood members genuinely believed in this divine selection process, helped reconcile them to their roles, transforming what might otherwise be seen as murder for hire into sacred duty, fulfilling cosmic purpose. The Brotherhood's relationship with Imperial authorities remained one of total opposition, but practical recognition. Unlike the Thieves Guild, which operated in a gray area of semi-tolerance, the Brotherhood faced uncompromising suppression whenever identified. Imperial Legion and city guards maintained standing orders to arrest or kill suspected Brotherhood members on sight, with no possibility of the tacit arrangements that sometimes moderated responses to lesser criminal activities. Yet despite this official stance, practical officials recognized the Brotherhood's deeply entrenched position in Imperial society, a problem that could be managed but not eliminated through conventional enforcement approaches. This practical recognition occasionally extended to actual utilization of Brotherhood services by individuals within the power structure itself. Though none would publicly acknowledge such arrangements, historical records contain numerous suspicious deaths of political opponents, inconvenient witnesses, or others whose removal benefited specific officials or noble houses. The Brotherhood's strict confidentiality regarding clients, maintaining secrecy even under torture, made it a tempting resource for those within the establishment who required permanent solutions to problems that could not be addressed through legitimate channels. For its members, the Brotherhood provided benefits that extended beyond mere payment for contracted killings. The sanctuaries offered refuge from a society that would reject or execute them for their actions, and often for their psychological nature. Fellow assassins provided understanding and acceptance impossible to find elsewhere. The Brotherhood's religious framework gave cosmic significance to acts that wider society condemned as monstrous, and for many, the highly structured environment with clear expectations and boundaries offered stability that their disordered previous lives had lacked, a paradoxical but genuine source of comfort for individuals whose relationship with conventional morality had already irreparably fractured. During the period depicted in Oblivion, the Dark Brotherhood experienced perhaps its greatest internal crisis in centuries, a systematic betrayal from within that threatened its continued existence throughout Cyrodiil. A high-ranking member, believing the organization had strayed from its original purpose and principles, orchestrated the elimination of multiple sanctuary members and even members of the Black Hand itself, creating confusion and paranoia that temporarily paralyzed Brotherhood operations. This purge, eventually halted through the efforts of a new member who rose rapidly through Brotherhood ranks during the crisis, revealed both vulnerabilities in the organization's structure and its remarkable resilience when faced with existential threat. This internal conflict coincided with the broader Oblivion crisis, creating a period of extraordinary challenge for the Brotherhood. Daedric attacks disrupted normal movement patterns, complicated sanctuary security, and created general chaos that made both performing contracts and maintaining organizational cohesion increasingly difficult. Some sanctuaries suffered direct damage during Daedric assaults on their host cities, forcing relocations or consolidations that further strained Brotherhood resources and leadership. Yet despite these challenges, the Brotherhood survived both its internal betrayal and the external crisis, adapting with the same discipline and focus that characterized its approach to contracted killings. Sanctuaries adjusted security protocols to account for new threats. Members developed techniques effective against Daedric entities when contracts or self-defense required confronting them, and the religious framework that guided Brotherhood operations incorporated the Oblivion crisis into its theological understanding, interpreting these events as Sith is testing the organization's faithfulness and commitment before revealing new purpose in the changed world that would follow. In the aftermath of Martin Septim's sacrifice and the permanent closure of the barriers between Oblivion and Mundus, the Brotherhood faced the challenge of re-establishing its operations amidst transformed circumstances. Imperial authority had weakened, creating both opportunities for expansion and threats from reduced stability. Economic disruption, following widespread destruction, altered patterns of contract requests, with changes in who could afford Brotherhood services and what motivations drove them to seek assassination. And the psychological impact of the crisis affected even Brotherhood members whose intimate familiarity with death had not prepared them for the scale of destruction witnessed during Daedric invasion. The Dark Brotherhood's response to these post-crisis challenges demonstrated its fundamental adaptability despite rigid adherence to core principles. The Black Hand reorganized sanctuary jurisdictions to account for population shifts and changed security environments. Recruitment practices evolved to identify potential members among veterans traumatized by fighting Daedra, individuals whose experiences had often shattered conventional moral frameworks, and contract fulfillment methods adjusted to the reduced Imperial presence in many regions, balancing the greater freedom this provided against the increased general danger that accompanied weakened governance. For the general population of Cyrodiil, the Dark Brotherhood embodied primordial fears, the possibility of death striking without warning, arranged by unseen enemies for reasons one might never understand. Unlike conventional dangers that could be guarded against through predictable precautions, Brotherhood assassination represented an almost supernatural threat. Killers who might approach in any guise, utilize any method, and operate according to motives and principles entirely alien to conventional understanding. This fear manifested in widespread superstition and cultural practices designed to ward against Brotherhood attention. Many avoided speaking the organization's name directly, referring instead to the family or similar euphemisms. Some believed certain protective rituals or talismans could divert Brotherhood interest, though no evidence suggested such measures had any actual effect. Parents invoked the Brotherhood to frighten misbehaving children into obedience, creating cautionary tales that, while exaggerated, contained sufficient truth to maintain their power across generations. Yet alongside this general fear existed a complex fascination, the same dark attraction that draws attention to any forbidden or taboo subject. Tales of Brotherhood exploits circulated in taverns and marketplaces, often becoming exaggerated through retelling until they portrayed the assassins as possessing nearly supernatural abilities. Books purporting to reveal Brotherhood secrets became popular despite or because of official disapproval, and occasionally individuals attempted to contact the Brotherhood, not to arrange contracts, but to express admiration or seek membership, usually with fatal consequences for such presumption. This ambivalent position in the collective consciousness, feared yet fascinating, condemned yet secretly admired for skill and effectiveness, allowed the Brotherhood to maintain its unique position in Imperial society across centuries. Unlike purely criminal organizations that society universally rejected, or cults whose beliefs found no resonance in wider cultural understanding, the Brotherhood connected with something deeply rooted in human nature: the recognition that death walks always beside life, that darkness exists within light, and that even the most civilized society contains elements beyond rational explanation or control. In this sense, the Dark Brotherhood served a function extending beyond its contracted killings or religious observances. It embodied the shadow aspects of Imperial civilization, the capacity for calculated violence, the willingness to set aside conventional morality for sufficient reward, the recognition that some problems have no solution within established rules and boundaries, that the Brotherhood channeled these elements through strict codes and religious framework, perhaps made it simultaneously more disturbing and more comprehensible than random, disorganized expressions of similar human tendencies would have been. As we conclude our examination of this most shadowed faction, remember that understanding does not imply approval. The Dark Brotherhood represents aspects of human nature and social organization that most would rightly reject as basis for general conduct. Yet, in studying even such dark corners of Tamriel's institutional landscape, we gain insight not merely into specific historical events and figures, but into the complex interplay between civilization's surface structures and the darker currents that flow beneath them, currents that no society, regardless of its ideals and aspirations, has ever fully eliminated from human experience. Chapter 6. The Blades. Among the many factions operating within the complex social ecology of Tamriel, few can claim the distinguished yet secretive legacy of the Blades, an organization whose public role as the Emperor's bodyguards concealed deeper purposes and more ancient origins than most citizens ever suspected. Neither fully military nor entirely covert, neither purely secular nor explicitly religious, the Blades occupied a unique position within Imperial structure while maintaining traditions that predated the Empire itself. The origins of the Blades trace back not to Cyrodiil, but to Akavir, the mysterious continent east of Tamriel, from which several attempted invasions have emerged throughout recorded history. During the First Era, specifically around 1E2703, the forces of Emperor Reman Cyrodiil defeated an Akaviri invasion, after which many of the defeated warriors pledged loyalty to the Emperor they had come to respect during the conflict. These Akaviri, originally called the Dragon Guard in their homeland, brought with them not just distinctive fighting styles and weaponry, but a complex warrior tradition centered around service to dragonborn individuals whom they believed possessed souls capable of commanding dragons. In Reman Cyrodiil, who demonstrated the ability to absorb dragon souls, just as the legendary Nords of the Merthic era had done, these Akaviri found a worthy master who fulfilled their ancient prophecies. Their surrender transformed immediately into fanatical loyalty, beginning the tradition of personal service to the dragonborn emperors that would define the Blade's purpose for centuries to come. This transition from enemies to sworn protectors exemplified the organization's pragmatic adaptability, valuing their core mission of serving the dragonborn above political affiliations or cultural origins. Over subsequent centuries, the Blades evolved beyond their Akaviri beginnings, incorporating members from all races of Tamriel, while maintaining distinctive traditions, equipment, and organizational structures derived from their founders. Their headquarters, originally established at what would become Cloud Ruler Temple in the Jural Mountains north of Bruma, combined Akaviri architectural elements with practical defensive considerations, creating a fortress both symbolically significant and militarily formidable. Additional temples and outposts were established throughout the empire, including the significant fortress of Skyhaven Temple in Skyrim, though many of these fell into disuse or obscurity during later periods. By the late Third Era, the period depicted in Oblivion, the Blades had developed into a complex organization with multiple interconnected functions. Most visibly, they served as the Emperor's personal guard, with Blades members in distinctive armor accompanying the ruler at all public appearances and maintaining constant protection within the Imperial Palace. This ceremonial role, while genuine in its protective purpose, represented only the surface level of Blades operations. Behind this public facade operated the Blades intelligence network, perhaps the most sophisticated system of information gathering and analysis in Tamriel. Agents placed throughout the provinces reported on political developments, potential threats, and significant events, creating a comprehensive awareness of Imperial conditions unavailable through conventional governance channels. These operatives rarely identified themselves as Blades, instead maintaining cover identities as merchants, scholars, adventurers, or other professions that facilitated travel and information access without attracting undue attention. Coordinating these diverse activities was the Grand Master, the organization's highest authority, apart from the Emperor himself. During the Oblivion Crisis, this position was held by Jaffrey, a monk at Waynon Priory, whose unassuming appearance concealed both his leadership role and his formidable martial capabilities. The Grand Master maintained direct access to the Emperor, operated outside normal chains of command, and held authority to mobilize Blades resources throughout the Empire when circumstances required, creating a uniquely responsive organization despite its relatively small size compared to the Imperial Legion or other military forces. Membership in the Blades combined elements of military service, intelligence, tradecraft, and religious devotion. Candidates underwent rigorous evaluation before receiving invitation, with selection criteria emphasizing not just combat proficiency, but loyalty, discretion, intelligence, and dedication to the Dragonborn ideal the organization served. Once accepted, new members participated in extensive training covering weaponry, particularly the distinctive Akaviri katana and armor, intelligence gathering techniques, and the extensive historical and religious traditions that gave meaning to Blade's service. This initiation created more than merely professional affiliation. It established personal identity fundamentally linked to the organization's purpose and values. Blade's members took oaths binding them to lifelong service, with retirement rare and resignation almost unheard of, except in cases of serious injury or incapacity. The oft-repeated phrase, "Once a blade, always a blade," reflected both the permanence of this commitment and the mutual loyalty between the organization and its members. Blades protected each other with the same dedication they showed to the Emperor, creating bonds that transcended typical military or official relationships. The daily activities of individual blades varied tremendously depending on their specific assignments and current Imperial circumstances. Those serving as visible guards maintained intensive combat readiness while developing intimate familiarity with the Emperor's habits, preferences, and potential vulnerabilities requiring protection. Field agents engaged in intelligence gathering lived lives dictated by their cover identities, with Blade's activities interwoven with their apparent normal routines. Those stationed at Cloud Ruler Temple or other Blades facilities focused on training, equipment maintenance, historical research, and mission preparation, maintaining operational readiness while preserving the ancient traditions that defined the organization. The relationship between the Blades and other Imperial institutions reflected their unique status and purpose. With the Imperial Legion, they maintained cordial professional cooperation while preserving clear jurisdictional boundaries. The Legion handled external threats and large-scale security, while the Blades focused on specific protection and intelligence priorities directed by the Emperor personally. The Elder Council recognized Blade's authority in their specialized domain, while occasionally resenting their direct access to the Emperor outside normal governmental channels. City guards and local officials provided cooperation when requested, but received minimal information about broader Blades operations or purposes, maintaining the organization's necessary secrecy. More complicated was the Blades' relationship with the Penitus Oculatus, another specialized protection force established during the later Septim period to handle routine Emperor security, allowing the Blades to focus more on their intelligence functions and special operations. Though officially complementary, these organizations sometimes developed rivalries and jurisdictional disputes, particularly when their respective chains of command issued contradictory priorities, or when information sharing proved less than ideal during complex security situations. The Blades' equipment and fighting techniques preserved their Akaviri heritage while incorporating practical adaptations to current circumstances. Their distinctive armor, made from high-quality steel, shaped into overlapping plates, reminiscent of ancient Akaviri designs, provided excellent protection while remaining lighter and more flexible than comparable heavy armor from other traditions. Their primary weapon, the Akaviri katana, represented both practical combat tool and symbolic connection to the organization's origins, a curved single-edged sword designed for quick, precise cuts rather than the heavier chopping strokes characteristic of Imperial Legion weapons. Beyond physical equipment, the Blades maintained distinctive architectural and cultural practices that preserved their unique identity across generations. Cloud Ruler Temple exemplified their architectural philosophy, outwardly fortress-like and defensively formidable, while internally incorporating traditional Akaviri elements like curved rooflines, specific ceremonial spaces, and artifact displays connecting current members to their organizational heritage, rituals for significant events, induction of new members, commemoration of fallen blades, celebration of Imperial milestones, followed forms established centuries earlier, providing continuity despite the organization's necessary adaptations to changing circumstances. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Blades faced their greatest challenge since the organization's founding, not merely protecting the current emperor, but preserving the Dragonborn lineage itself, when threats emerged beyond conventional anticipation or defense. The assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim VII, despite the presence of Blades guards, revealed the limitations of even the most dedicated protection force against determined, supernaturally aided attackers. The subsequent death of his known heirs created an existential crisis for an organization whose entire purpose centered around service to the Dragonborn bloodline. The Blades' response to these unprecedented circumstances demonstrated both their adaptability and their unwavering commitment to core principles. Under Grandmaster Joffre's leadership, they immediately initiated the search for Martin Septim, the Emperor's previously unknown illegitimate son and last remaining heir to the Dragonblood. When conventional resources proved insufficient for this task, Joffrey made the unorthodox decision to recruit outside assistance from the same prisoner who had witnessed Uriel's final moments, beginning the sequence of events that would ultimately lead to Martin's identification, protection, and eventual sacrifice to end the Oblivion Crisis. Throughout this period, the Blades operated with remarkable effectiveness, despite catastrophic losses and circumstances beyond any contingency planning. Cloud Ruler Temple, transformed from historical headquarters to active fortress, providing protection for Martin while serving as coordination center for resistance against Daedric invasion. Blades agents throughout the provinces gathered critical intelligence about Oblivion Gates and Mythic Dawn activities, creating the information foundation necessary for effective response. And when conventional military approaches proved inadequate against Daedric forces, the Blades adapted rapidly, developing new tactics and coordinating with other factions like the Mages Guild to identify effective countermeasures. Perhaps most significantly, the Blades maintained their absolute loyalty to the Dragonborn ideal, even when that required supporting an untested heir who had spent his life unaware of his Imperial heritage. Despite Martin Septim's lack of training, experience, or even initial belief in his own legitimacy, the Blades transferred their complete dedication from his father to him without hesitation or reservation, providing the organizational foundation that enabled his eventual acceptance of leadership responsibility and sacrificial role in ending the crisis. In the aftermath of Martin's sacrifice and the formal end of the Dragonborn lineage, the Blades confronted an existential question unprecedented in their long history. What purpose remained for an organization dedicated to serving rulers whose bloodline had ended, with no Dragonborn emperor to protect, with the covenant between Akatosh and the Septim dynasty transformed into something new and different through Martin's sacrifice? The very foundation of Blade's identity and mission had seemingly dissolved, leaving uncertainty about their continuing role and purpose. The organization's response to this fundamental challenge remains somewhat obscured in historical records, particularly given the subsequent Thalmor Purge centuries later that destroyed much Blade's documentation. What seems clear is that they continued operating during the difficult years following the crisis, protecting the fragile political structure that emerged during the interregnum and eventually transferring some measure of loyalty to the Mei dynasty that assumed the Ruby throne. However, this service apparently lacked the religious devotion and absolute commitment that had characterized their relationship with Dragonborn emperors, becoming more professional and pragmatic rather than transcendent in nature. Simultaneously, evidence suggests a gradual return to the organization's even older purpose, the hunting and study of dragons, which had seemingly disappeared from Tamriel, but remained central to original Akaviri Dragonguard traditions. Increased research into ancient prophecies, renewed interest in Dragonborn lore beyond the Imperial lineage, and the maintenance of specialized knowledge about dragon weaknesses and fighting techniques all indicate a shift in organizational focus that would prove prescient centuries later when dragons returned to Tamriel during the Fourth Era. For the general populace of Cyrodiil, during the late Third Era, the blades represented a visible symbol of imperial authority and continuity. The distinctive armored figures flanking the emperor at all public appearances, the elite warriors whose presence signified the highest level of protection and prestige. Most citizens knew nothing of their intelligence operations, their ancient dragon hunting origins, or their quasi-religious devotion to the Dragonborn ideal. They saw only the surface manifestation, impressive warriors whose obvious skill and dedication reinforced the emperor's status and power. Yet even this limited public awareness contributed to imperial stability by creating powerful symbolism around the throne. The blade's distinctive appearance, their ceremonial but clearly functional combat readiness, and their absolute loyalty all communicated important messages about imperial authority, that it rested not merely on political arrangements, but on traditions extending beyond current circumstances, that it commanded devotion from the most capable servants, and that it maintained continuity despite individual rulers' mortality. In this symbolic function, beyond their practical protective and intelligence roles, the blades served a purpose that helped sustain imperial legitimacy across generations of political change and challenge. As we conclude our examination of this remarkable organization, consider how the blades embody a principle common across Tamriel's most enduring institutions, the ability to maintain core identity and purpose while adapting to changing circumstances. From Akaviri invaders to Imperial guardians, from dragon hunters to intelligence operatives, from ceremonial protectors to desperate defenders during cosmic crisis, the blades transformed repeatedly throughout their long history without abandoning the fundamental commitments and traditions that defined them. This balance between preservation and adaptation, between honoring ancient ways and meeting current challenges, represents perhaps their greatest achievement and the true source of their remarkable longevity in a world of constant change and upheaval. Chapter 7. The Knights of the Nine. Unlike the other factions we have explored, some ancient in origin, others firmly established throughout the Third Era, the Knights of the Nine represent a more complex historical trajectory, encompassing a brief period of glory, centuries of dissolution and forgetting, and then remarkable restoration, precisely during the tumultuous aftermath of the Oblivion crisis. Their story embodies themes of faith, redemption, and renewal particularly resonant during a time when Tamriel confronted fundamental questions about divine protection and mortal responsibility. The original Knights of the Nine were founded in the early Third Era, specifically 3E111, when Sir Amiel Lannis, a pious knight, troubled by the chaos and suffering following the War of the Isle, received what he believed was divine inspiration to establish an order dedicated to recovering and protecting the Crusaders' relics. These artifacts, said to have belonged to the divine crusader Pellinor Whitestrake during his campaign against the Aelids in the First Era, had been lost for centuries, scattered across Cyrodiil and beyond. Sir Amiel envisioned an order of knights who would recover these holy items while embodying the virtues of the nine divines through both martial prowess and spiritual devotion. With the blessing of Tiber Septim, now Emperor Tiber Septim III, though not yet ascended to godhood as Talos, Sir Amiel established the Priory of the Nine in the west, Weald of Cyrodiil, south of Skingrad, and Kvash. This modest compound featured a chapel, living quarters, training facilities, and eventually a reliquary designed to house the artifacts the knights recovered through their quests. From this base, Sir Amiel recruited 8 other founding knights, each embodying particular virtues and skills that complemented the others, creating a fellowship that balanced martial capability with religious dedication. The early decades of the Knights of the Nine represent their golden age, a period of remarkable achievements and growing renown throughout Cyrodiil. Within the first 20 years of their existence, the knights recovered several of the Crusaders' relics through quests that became the stuff of legend and song. The Mace of the Crusader, found in an ancient chapel near Liawen, the Shield of the Crusader, recovered from a shrine in the mountains northwest of Skingrad. The Cuirass of the Crusader, discovered in an undead-haunted crypt near Kurl. With each successful quest, the knights' reputation grew, attracting new members and establishing their legitimacy as a divinely favored order. The knights of that era followed a disciplined daily routine that balanced martial training, religious observance, and practical service. Mornings typically began with prayers in the Priory Chapel, followed by weapons practice and physical conditioning. Afternoons might include study of religious texts, maintenance of equipment, or service to nearby communities through protection, healing, or other assistance. Evenings often featured communal meals, planning sessions for upcoming quests, and further devotions before rest. This regimen created not merely effective warriors, but fully integrated servants of the Nine, whose martial skills existed specifically to protect and advance divine purposes, rather than for personal glory or political advantage. Membership in the original Knights followed a progression from aspirant to full Knight, with each stage involving both practical demonstration of capability and spiritual development through tests of virtue and character. Potential members typically began by performing services for the Order, perhaps accompanying established knights on routine patrols or maintaining the priory grounds, while demonstrating their dedication to the Nine Divines through regular worship and virtuous conduct. Those who proved worthy might be invited to take preliminary vows, becoming squires who trained directly under full knights, while learning the Order's traditions and principles. The final transition to knighthood involved both ceremonial elements and practical tests, culminating in a vigil at the Chapel of Stendar in Charl, where the candidate would pray for divine guidance and blessing before receiving formal induction into the Order. This deliberate, extended process ensured that those who became full knights possessed not just combat skills, but the spiritual maturity and ethical foundation necessary for their unique role as both warriors and religious exemplars. The knights' equipment reflected their dual martial and religious nature. Their distinctive armor, white with gold trim and bearing the symbol of the Nine Divines, served both practical protective purposes and as visible indication of their allegiance and mission. Unlike more ornate ceremonial armor worn by some religious orders, Knights of the Nine equipment was fully functional for combat, reflecting their active role in confronting evil rather than merely performing ceremonial duties. When available, Crusaders' relics were distributed among the most worthy knights, according to their particular skills and the current challenges facing the Order. Despite these auspicious beginnings and early successes, the Knights of the Nine experienced rapid decline beginning around 3E121, just a decade after their foundation, when the War of the Red Diamond erupted following Emperor Antiochus Septim's death. This succession crisis, with multiple claimants to the Ruby Throne supported by different provinces and factions, created divided loyalties even within religious organizations like the Knights. Some members supported Protima, the Wolf Queen of Solitude, while others backed her nephew Sepphoris. This internal division contradicted the Order's founding principles of unity and shared purpose, creating fractures that would never fully heal. Though the war eventually ended with Sepphoris's victory, the Knights of the Nine never regained their former cohesion and focus. Membership declined as potential recruits chose less controversial organizations. Financial support diminished as patrons directed resources toward rebuilding after the conflict. Perhaps most significantly, the spiritual certainty that had guided the original Knights gave way to doubt and questioning. If divine will had been so unclear during the succession crisis that even dedicated religious knights could not agree on the righteous path, how could they claim special insight or guidance in other matters? This decline accelerated over subsequent decades. By approximately 3E131, Sir Amiel found himself leading an order reduced to just a handful of dedicated knights. The quests for remaining relics continued, but with diminished success and recognition. Maintenance of the priory facilities became increasingly difficult with reduced personnel and resources, and the deaths of original founding members through age, illness, or misadventure removed the living connections to the Order's inspiring early history, leaving newer members without the direct mentorship that had previously transmitted the Knights' unique culture and purpose. The final blow came with Sir Berich Flindrel's betrayal, a founding member who, following personal tragedy and growing disillusionment, abandoned the Knights, taking the sword and greaves of the Crusader with him. This loss of both a respected leader and crucial relics demoralized the remaining Knights beyond recovery. By 3E150, Sir Amiel alone remained at the Priory of the Nine, maintaining solitary vigil until his eventual death, after which the Order existed only in scattered records and fading memory. For over 2 centuries, the Knights of the Nine remained essentially forgotten, their priory falling into ruin, their achievements preserved only in rare texts and occasionally mentioned by scholars of obscure Third-Era history. The Crusaders' relics, once the focus of their quests and devotion, scattered once more across Tamriel, some in remote shrines, others in private collections, a few lost completely to knowledge. This period of obscurity meant that, unlike other factions that evolved continuously throughout the Third Era, the Knights existed primarily as historical footnote, rather than living institution during the time immediately preceding the Oblivion crisis. What makes the Knights of the Nine particularly significant for our exploration is their remarkable restoration following the crisis, a rebirth that coincided with and responded to Tamriel's spiritual needs during that traumatic period. In the aftermath of Martin Septim's sacrifice and the fundamental renegotiation of the covenant between Akatosh and the mortal world, religious sensibilities throughout Cyrodiil underwent profound transformation. The direct, visible divine intervention that ended the Oblivion crisis created renewed interest in the relationship between Aedra and mortals, between divine protection and human responsibility. This spiritual awakening coincided with a new threat that seemed specifically designed to test these evolving relationships. In the Chapel of Dibella in Anvil, a powerful Alid sorcerer called Umeral the Unfeathered, a figure thought defeated by Pelennor Whiterstrake thousands of years earlier, returned through Daedric assistance to wage war against the Nine Divines and their worshippers, beginning with the desecration of the Anvil Chapel and the murder of priests and worshippers. This supernatural threat demanded response beyond conventional military or magical capabilities, requiring weapons and warriors specifically consecrated for confrontation with divine and anti-divine forces. The threat of Umaril created precisely the conditions necessary for rediscovering and restoring the Knights of the Nine tradition. A champion emerged, whose specific identity remains somewhat ambiguous in historical records, who received divine guidance, leading to the prophet, an enigmatic figure who appeared near the ruins of Kvatch following the Daedric destruction of that city. This prophet directed the champion to recover the Crusaders' relics and rebuild the Knights of the Nine to confront Umaril, a threat that could be permanently defeated only through the divine power contained within these ancient artifacts. What followed represented simultaneously restoration and reinvention of the Knights' tradition. The champion undertook pilgrimage to the way shrines of the Nine Divines, scattered throughout Cyrodiil, demonstrating humility and devotion required for wielding the relics. Through divine guidance and historical research, they discovered the ruined Priory of the Nine and began its restoration. And following the original pattern established by Sir Emil, they recruited knights who embodied various skills and virtues necessary for the Order's renewed purpose, creating a fellowship that balanced martial prowess with spiritual dedication. The recovery of the Crusaders' relics formed the central narrative of this restoration period. Each artifact required not merely physical location and retrieval, but specific spiritual preparations and tests appropriate to its nature. The helm of the Crusader could be claimed only after demonstrating compassion toward the unworthy. The gauntlets required acts of mercy toward enemies. The sword had to be cleansed of the spiritual taint left by Sir Beric's fall from grace. These quests functioned as both practical recovery of powerful tools and spiritual formation of those who would wield them, ensuring that the restored knights possessed both the equipment and character necessary for their confrontation with Umaril. The rebuilt Priory of the Nine differed from its original incarnation in several significant ways, reflecting both changed circumstances and lessons learned from the Order's earlier dissolution. Membership requirements emphasize personal commitment to the Nine Divines rather than political allegiances, avoiding the divided loyalties that had contributed to the original Order's fragmentation. Leadership structure focused more on shared purpose than hierarchical authority, with the champion serving as first among equals rather than commanding officer. And perhaps most importantly, the spiritual foundation rested on direct divine guidance made manifest through the Crusaders' relics and prophetic communication rather than merely human interpretation of religious principles. The confrontation with Umaril represented the culmination of this restoration process and the definitive establishment of the new Knights of the Nine as legitimate successors to the original Order. Armed with the recovered relics and spiritually prepared through their quests and devotions, the champion led the knights first against Umaril's mortal followers who had desecrated chapels throughout Cyrodiil, then ultimately against Umaril himself in both physical and spiritual battle. This final confrontation occurred in two phases, first defeating Umaril's physical form in the mortal realm, then pursuing his spirit into the spiritual planes to prevent his eventual return, achieving the permanent victory that had eluded even Pelennor Whiterstrake millennia earlier. In the aftermath of this victory, The restored Knights of the Nine established themselves as a permanent presence in 4th era Cyrodiil, though with a significantly different role than most military or religious organizations. Rather than seeking political influence or territorial control, they focused on protection of sacred sites, preservation of religious knowledge threatened by chaos following the Septim dynasty's end, and practical assistance to communities struggling with the aftermath of both the Oblivion crisis and subsequent conflicts. This approach embodied the lessons learned from the original Order's decline, that spiritual purpose required separation from political entanglements, and that service required humility rather than glory-seeking. The Knights' experiences during the Great War and subsequent concordat with the Aldmeri Dominion remain somewhat obscured in historical records, particularly given the ban on Talos worship that directly challenged one aspect of their founding principles. Some evidence suggests they maintained their traditions secretly during this period, perhaps operating under different names or dispersing into smaller groups while preserving their essential purpose and commitments. Other indications point to possible relocation to regions beyond direct Dominion influence, such as Eastern Skyrim or Northern Hammerfell, where they could continue their practices with less interference. For the citizens of Cyrodiil during the immediate post-crisis period, the restored Knights of the Nine represented a powerful symbol of renewal and divine protection during profoundly uncertain times. With the Septim dynasty ended, with the traditional covenant between Akatosh and the Empire transformed through Martin's sacrifice, the Knights provided tangible evidence that divine concern for the mortal realm continued despite these fundamental changes. Their visible presence at sacred sites, their assistance to troubled communities, and the stories of their successful confrontation with Umeral all contributed to restoring confidence in divine protection at a time when such reassurance was desperately needed. This symbolic function extended beyond mere comfort to include practical demonstration of how mortals might relate to divine powers in the post-crisis era, where previous generations had relied on the Emperor as mediator between mortal and divine through the Amulet of Kings and the Dragonfire's ritual. This traditional arrangement had ended permanently with Martin's sacrifice. The Knights of the Nine, through their direct communion with the divines, their quests guided by divine communication rather than imperial authority, and their emphasis on personal virtue rather than institutional position, modeled a new paradigm for divine mortal interaction, suited to an age without dragonborn emperors. In this new approach to divine matters, individual worthiness replaced bloodline legitimacy, demonstrated virtue replaced institutional authority, and direct communion with the divines replaced mediated relationships through established hierarchies. This shift reflected broader changes in Tamrielic religious sensibilities following the crisis, a movement toward more personal and immediate spiritual experiences, particularly notable in worship of Akatosh, whose direct intervention through the Avatar at the Temple of the One had demonstrated divine concern operating beyond traditional channels and covenants. As we conclude our examination of this unique faction, consider how the Knights of the Nine embody themes particularly relevant to the post-crisis period: restoration after devastation, faith tested and renewed through direct challenges, tradition adapted to changed circumstances, and the discovery of new purposes for ancient wisdom and artifacts. In their journey from glory through dissolution to eventual rebirth, they mirror Tamriel's broader experience following the Oblivion crisis, suggesting possibilities for renewal and meaning, even amid unprecedented disruption of established patterns and certainties. This pattern, destruction followed by restoration, but in forms adapted to new realities, rather than mere recreation of past arrangements, appears consistently across Tamriel's response to the crisis. The Knights of the Nine represent not merely another guild or faction, but a specific manifestation of this broader pattern of cultural and spiritual adaptation, demonstrating how Tamrielic society maintained continuity with its past, while evolving to meet the challenges of a fundamentally altered world. Chapter 8: Minor Factions and Hidden Powers. While the major guilds and organizations we've explored thus far dominated Cyrodiil's social landscape, numerous smaller factions operated throughout the province, some openly but with limited scope, others hidden from public awareness, yet wielding significant influence within their specialized domains. These minor factions and hidden powers added crucial texture to Third Era society, addressing needs or exploiting opportunities that larger institutions overlooked or deliberately avoided, creating a complex institutional ecosystem that extended far beyond official structures and recognized authorities. Among the most significant of these lesser-known organizations was the Blackwood Company, a mercenary group that established itself as direct competition to the Fighters Guild during the late Third Era. Operating from headquarters in Leyawian, the company recruited primarily non-Imperial members, particularly Khajiit and Argonians, who often faced discrimination within traditional Imperial institutions. This composition reflected both their origin in the border regions near Black Marsh and their deliberate positioning as an alternative to the human-dominated Fighters Guild. The Blackwood Company's business model centered around accepting contracts that the Fighters Guild refused on ethical grounds, assignments that violated guild regulations regarding appropriate targets or acceptable methods. This approach attracted clients frustrated by guild limitations, particularly those seeking more aggressive solutions to problems or targeting competitors rather than genuine threats. By positioning themselves as more efficient and less constrained by bureaucratic oversight, the company secured significant market share despite their relatively recent arrival in Cyrodiil. What distinguished the Blackwood Company beyond mere ethical flexibility was their use of a modified form of hissed sap, the sacred substance normally consumed only by Argonians during their coming-of-age ceremony. Through unknown means, the company obtained a transplanted hiss tree and extracted sap, which, when processed and consumed by their fighters, produced temporary enhancement of strength, aggression, and pain tolerance. These effects created significant tactical advantages, allowing company members to continue fighting through injuries that would incapacitate normal combatants and to strike with supernatural force. This advantage came at terrible cost, however. The modified sap induced hallucinations alongside its physical effects, causing users to perceive threats where none existed. In the most notorious incident, company members slaughtered an entire village while believing they were fighting goblins, a tragedy that eventually contributed to their downfall when a Fighters Guild investigation exposed both the massacre and the sap usage behind it. This revelation, combined with Imperial crackdown on their operations, effectively ended the Blackwood Company as a significant faction, though scattered former members continued operating independently well into the Fourth Era. More benevolent but equally specialized was the Order of the Virtuous Blood, a secretive organization dedicated specifically to hunting vampires within the Imperial city. Founded by a reformed vampire named Ceridur, the Order combined practical vampire hunting skills with research into vampiric nature, weaknesses, and detection methods. Unlike larger monster hunting organizations with broader mandates, The Order focused exclusively on vampire-related threats, developing specialized expertise that larger institutions like the Fighters Guild or Imperial Legion lacked. The Order operated from a modest headquarters in the Imperial City's Temple District, maintaining low public profile while recruiting members who had personal reasons for opposing vampires, typically those who had lost family members to vampire attacks or who had narrowly escaped infection themselves. This focused membership created powerful motivation and dedication, allowing the small organization to achieve significant impact on vampire activity within the capital despite limited resources and personnel. What made the Order particularly interesting was its nuanced approach to vampirism, recognizing the condition as disease and curse rather than freely chosen evil, while still acknowledging the threat that vampires pose to mortal society. This perspective allowed for potential rehabilitation of those recently infected, while maintaining firm opposition to ancient vampires who had embraced their condition and preyed deliberately on mortal populations. The Order thus occupied middle ground between simplistic extermination approaches and naive tolerance that ignored vampires' inherently predatory relationship with mortal society. Operating in a different sphere entirely was the Society of Concerned Merchants, a commercial association that functioned somewhere between legitimate trade guild and protection racket. Established by Imperial city merchants, frustrated with official trade regulations and taxation levels, the society created parallel commercial networks that circumvented certain imperial controls, while providing mutual support against both official interference and criminal predation. Members of the society paid regular dues that funded bribes to key officials, hired protection for shipments outside normal guard patrols, and shared information about market conditions and opportunities unavailable through official channels. In return, they gained access to simplified customs procedures, advance warning of regulatory changes, and collective bargaining power with suppliers and distributors. This arrangement occupied gray area between legitimate business association and organized evasion of imperial commercial law, neither fully legal nor clearly criminal, but operating in the substantial space between these categories. The society maintained no official headquarters or public presence, conducting business through coded correspondence, private meeting rooms in various inns and taverns, and occasional gatherings disguised as social events. Membership remained invitation only, with strict screening to prevent infiltration by either Legion investigators or criminal elements seeking to exploit merchant connections. This careful balance allowed the society to persist throughout the Third Era, despite periodic Imperial efforts to eliminate commercial organizations operating outside official oversight and regulation. More directly oppositional to Imperial authority was the Icewind Coven, a group of necromancers who established hidden operations throughout northern Cyrodiil, following Archmage Traven's ban on necromancy within the Mages Guild. Unlike the larger and more notorious Cult of the Black Worm, led by Manamarco, the Icewind Coven maintained strictly pragmatic, rather than religious approach to necromantic practice, viewing reanimation and soul manipulation as technical magical disciplines rather than spiritual paths or Daedric worship. The Coven operated primarily from a network of caves and abandoned forts in the Gerol and Vallis Mountains, areas where harsh conditions and sparse population provided natural isolation from Imperial oversight. Their activities included experimental development of new necromantic techniques, preservation and study of ancient texts, banned from conventional libraries, and practical application of their knowledge through creation of undead servants for labor and protection. While avoiding the direct aggression against living communities that characterized more extreme necromantic groups, They maintained no ethical limitations beyond pragmatic concern for avoiding detection and suppression. What distinguished the Icewind Coven from similar groups was their purely academic approach to forbidden magic, pursuit of knowledge and capability, without specific agenda for its application beyond the immediate needs of Coven members. This contrasted sharply with necromancers seeking power for conquest, revenge against perceived enemies, or service to Daedric masters. The Coven's neutrality regarding larger conflicts, including the Oblivion crisis itself, reflected this focused dedication to necromancy as discipline rather than means toward external goals, a position that allowed their survival when more aggressive groups drew concentrated opposition from Imperial forces. Operating at the intersection of legitimate commerce and shadowy manipulation was the Cyrodiil Shipping Company, ostensibly a conventional maritime trading enterprise that concealed extensive smuggling operations and intelligence-gathering network extending throughout the Abetian Sea and beyond. Under cover of routine shipping activities, company vessels transported goods avoiding imperial taxation, items prohibited under various regulations, and occasionally individuals traveling without official documentation or seeking to avoid imperial attention. Beyond these conventional smuggling activities, the company maintained extensive information-gathering operation through its agents in major ports throughout Western Tamriel. Ship captains and senior crew received training in observation, information assessment, and cryptographic communication, allowing them to collect and transmit intelligence about political developments, military movements, and economic conditions throughout regions where they operated. This information proved valuable not only for company commercial planning, but as tradable commodities sold to various factions, including, occasionally, the Elder Council itself, when information from unofficial sources proved useful for Imperial policy decisions. The company maintained headquarters in the Imperial City's waterfront district, operating from warehouses and offices that appeared entirely legitimate to casual observation. This conventional facade, combined with careful compartmentalization of knowledge within the organization, allowed their more questionable activities to continue despite periodic investigations by customs officials or Legion intelligence. Like many such operations throughout history, they survived through combination of actual valuable services, carefully cultivated political protection, and judicious application of bribery where necessary to deflect unwanted attention. In the spiritual realm, the Divinus Circle represented a small but influential faction of Imperial cult officials dedicated to exploring prophetic and oracular aspects of worship, typically downplayed in conventional religious practice. Established during the early Third Era by a group of priests who experienced synchronized visions following an unusual alignment of celestial bodies, the Circle maintained cautious balance between orthodox Imperial cult membership and exploration of divinatory practices, occasionally viewed with suspicion by more conventional religious authorities. The Circle operated primarily from a modest building near the Temple of the One in the Imperial City, with smaller affiliated groups in cathedral cities throughout Cyrodiil. Their activities centered around specific ritualized attempts to receive divine guidance through meditation, carefully formulated prayer, and interpretation of potential omens and signs within natural phenomena or unusual events. Unlike charismatic religious movements that emphasized immediate divine communication, the Circle maintained scholarly, methodical approach to potential prophecy, carefully documenting experiences, cross-referencing with historical records of similar phenomena, and subjecting interpretations to collegial review before ascribing definitive meaning to any experience. This cautious approach, allowed the circle to maintain standing within conventional religious structures, while exploring practices that, approached less carefully, might have drawn accusations of heresy or unauthorized innovation. Their influence extended beyond their limited membership, primarily through consultation relationships with various imperial officials and noble houses seeking guidance regarding significant decisions or interpretation of unusual events with potential divine significance. This advisory role, while never formalized in official capacity, provided substantial, if quiet, influence within certain circles of imperial governance and social leadership. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Diviners Circle achieved brief prominence through several members' accurate prediction of Daedric attack locations based on observed patterns in astronomical conditions, weather phenomena, and animal behavior preceding gate openings. These predictions, while not universally reliable, provided valuable advance warning in several instances, allowing evacuation or defensive preparation that saved numerous lives. This practical contribution during crisis temporarily elevated the circle's standing within both religious and secular institutions, though their influence diminished again during post-crisis normalization as conventional religious authorities reasserted traditional approaches to divine communication and guidance. Operating in more martial sphere, the Kavach Cavaliers represented an elite guard unit specific to the county of Kavach, distinguished by exceptional training standards and equipment quality exceeding typical city guards or even legion auxiliaries. Established by Count Ormelius Goldwine's grandfather in response to increased bandit activity along the Gold Road, the Cavaliers evolved from practical security force into prestigious military company that combined effective defense capabilities with ceremonial functions, reflecting Kavach's historical significance and prosperity. The Cavaliers maintained headquarters adjacent to Castle Kavach, with additional posts at strategic locations along major approaches to the city. Membership required extensive combat training, demonstrated loyalty to Kavach specifically rather than merely the Empire broadly, and adherence to code of conduct, emphasizing protection of civilian populations alongside defense of territorial integrity. Selection processes included both practical combat assessment and character evaluation, creating force distinguished by both martial capability and disciplined, honorable conduct. The destruction of Kavach during the initial phase of the Oblivion Crisis effectively ended the Cavaliers as organized force, with most members killed defending the city against overwhelming Daedric forces. However, several survivors continued operating in disrupted form during the crisis, applying their training to protection of refugee groups and eventually coordination with broader Imperial defense efforts. Following the crisis, former Cavaliers contributed significantly to Kavach reconstruction efforts, with their tradition eventually reformed under new leadership as symbol of the city's restoration and resilience, maintaining connection to pre-crisis heritage while adapting to post-crisis realities and requirements. In shadowy realm between legitimate government and criminal enterprise, operated various regional smuggling networks, organizations without formal names or visible structures, but exercising significant influence over movement of goods and people throughout specific territories. The Western Highlands Network controlled mountain passes between Cyrodiil and Hammerfell, specializing in moving goods that carried high tariffs when imported through official channels. The Southern Waterways Group dominated transportation along the lower Niben and surrounding wetlands, offering discreet travel for those avoiding official attention. The Gold Coast Consortium managed maritime smuggling along Cyrodiil's western coastline, coordinating with similar organizations in High Rock and Hammerfell to maintain extensive operation beyond any single province's enforcement jurisdiction. These networks maintained no formal membership structure or central leadership, operating instead through loose confederations of boat owners, caravan masters, guides, lookouts, and corrupt officials who coordinated activities through established protocols and mutual interest, rather than hierarchical command. This decentralized approach provided resilience against enforcement efforts, capturing or compromising individual participants, rarely revealed much about broader operation or significantly disrupted overall functionality. The networks persisted across generations, with operational knowledge and connections passed through family relationships, apprenticeships, and carefully vetted recruitment rather than documented procedures or formal training. Despite their illegal nature, these smuggling networks performed functions that many communities considered essential, providing access to goods unavailable through legitimate channels due to imperial prohibition, excessive taxation, or supply limitations. In border regions particularly, local economies often depended heavily on unofficial trade to maintain viable commercial activity, creating situations where entire communities tacitly supported smuggling operations through silence, misdirection of Legion investigations, or provision of resources and hiding places when needed. During the Oblivion crisis, these networks proved surprisingly valuable for emergency response and civilian protection, applying their intimate knowledge of hidden routes and remote shelter locations to evacuate threatened populations and transport essential supplies to areas cut off from official assistance. This practical contribution during extraordinary circumstances created complicated legacy for post-crisis enforcement efforts, as many communities that owed their survival to smuggler assistance became even more resistant to Imperial attempts at eliminating these networks following restoration of normal governance structures. Operating in an entirely different sphere, the Cyrodiilic Collections Company represented specialized antiquarian organization focused on location, recovery, and preservation of island artifacts throughout the province. Founded by wealthy Imperial city collectors concerned about destruction or improper handling of historically significant items, the company employed teams of scholars, scouts, and security personnel who systematically explored ruined island sites, carefully documenting and retrieving artifacts according to established archaeological protocols, rather than merely extracting valuable items for commercial purposes. The company maintained headquarters in the Imperial City's Market District, operating museum-like display space where significant discoveries were exhibited publicly, alongside educational materials about allied history and culture. This public-facing operation concealed more extensive activities, including restoration workshops, research facilities, and secured storage for items deemed too powerful or dangerous for general display. While officially operating as private enterprise, the company maintained close relationship with both the Arcane University and certain Imperial administrative departments, occasionally undertaking specific recovery missions at official request when items of particular historical or magical significance were identified. What distinguished the Cyrodiilic Collections Company from simple treasure hunters was their scholarly approach and ethical framework regarding artifact handling. Company teams included linguistic specialists capable of translating Aesolide inscriptions, magical researchers trained to identify and safely contain enchanted objects, and preservation experts who prevented degradation of recovered items. Their operational protocols emphasized extensive documentation of find locations and contexts before removal, preservation of historical information alongside physical artifacts, and refusal to disturb burial sites or religious artifacts, still holding cultural significance to living populations with Aesolide heritage. During the Oblivion crisis, the company's expertise proved unexpectedly valuable when connections between certain Aesolide magical principles and Daedric summoning techniques created opportunities for developing countermeasures against Oblivion gates. The company's scholars contributed significantly to research efforts at the Arcane University, providing access to artifacts and documentation that helped explain fundamental principles underlying the barriers between planes and mechanisms for their reinforcement. This contribution represented application of seemingly obscure historical knowledge to immediate practical crisis, demonstration of how even apparently specialized or academic organizations could provide crucial resources during unprecedented threats. These various minor factions and hidden powers, from mercenary companies to scholarly collectives, from smuggling networks to specialized security forces, created essential complexity within Cyrodiil's social landscape, providing services, opportunities, and sometimes threats that larger, more visible institutions could not or would not accommodate. Their operations filled gaps in official structures, exploited weaknesses in regulatory systems, addressed needs overlooked by conventional authorities, and occasionally challenged established power through alternative approaches to problems deemed settled by dominant institutions. During normal periods, these organizations operated primarily within their specialized domains, having limited impact on broader social patterns or governance structures. During crisis, however, particularly the unprecedented disruption of the Oblivion crisis, their alternative perspectives, specialized knowledge, and operational flexibility often proved disproportionately valuable, allowing responses that conventional institutions could not provide due to procedural limitations or conceptual frameworks inadequate for completely novel challenges. For the average citizen of Cyrodiil, these minor factions typically remain background features of social landscape. Organizations encountered occasionally through their specific services or activities rather than constant presences like major guilds or governmental bodies, yet collectively they created essential texture and adaptability within Imperial society, providing alternatives, supplements, and challenges to dominant institutions that prevented stagnation and created resilience against unexpected developments or threats. As we conclude our exploration of Cyrodiil's factions and guilds, remember that the province's true strength lay not in any single organization, however ancient its origins or extensive its operations, but in the complex ecosystem of interacting institutions, each with particular capabilities, limitations, and perspectives that together created a society capable of surviving even cosmic threats like the Oblivion crisis. In this institutional diversity, from the highest imperial offices to the humblest local associations, we find the true source of Tamriel's endurance across centuries of challenge, change, and occasionally catastrophe. Closing. And so concludes our journey through the guilds and factions of Cyrodiil, those organizations that provided structure, purpose, and belonging to the people of the Imperial province during the tumultuous close of the Third Era. From the martial discipline of the Fighters Guild to the shadowy operations of the Dark Brotherhood, from the ancient traditions of the Blades to the renewed purpose of the Knights of the Nine, each represented a different facet of Imperial society, different paths available to those seeking their place within a complex world. as the embers of our fire fade to gentle glow. I hope these tales have illuminated something of the human need for connection and meaning. How even in a world of magic and myth, people sought fellowship with others of similar purpose, building communities within communities that provided identity beyond mere existence as Imperial subjects. In our next gathering, we will explore the lands of Cyrodiil themselves, the varied regions and cities that compose the heart of the Empire, each with its unique character, history, and culture. From the cosmopolitan sophistication of the Imperial city to the rustic charm of Coral, from the merchant wealth of Anvil to the Nordic influences of Bruma, we will travel through landscapes, both physical and cultural, that defined the Imperial province. Until then, rest peacefully in the knowledge that even in times of greatest crisis, people find ways to stand together, to create order from chaos, and to forge bonds that transcend even the boundaries between worlds. Sleep well, dreamers and travelers, sleep well.